Hello everyone, and welcome to another one of our videos. Today is going to be part 2 of the Mac Pro 5.1 upgrade series. Last week we replaced the RAM in this computer. We upgraded from 20 gigabytes up to 64 gigabytes, and today we're going to be replacing the CPUs. Now, right now, this computer has a 8-core setup, so it has 2 quad-core Xeon processors, I believe running at 2.66 gigahertz, and I'm going to be replacing them with these Xeon X5680 processors. I have a matched set right here. Each one of these has 6 cores, so it's going to be turning into a 12-core system, and these run at 3.33 gigahertz. There is one CPU level higher than these, the Xeon X5690, but those CPUs only run a few hundred megahertz faster at 3.46 gigahertz, and they are about twice as expensive, at least at the time of this filming in 2019. So I decided to go with the X5680. You can get a pair of these for about $80-90, somewhere around there. Generally they come from China, where I'm assuming the servers that these used to live in are recycled, but they should drop right into this computer and should work perfectly. Now, this is a little bit more complex of an installation compared to the RAM. It's not just unplug and plug new components back in. You have to take off heat sinks, you have to install new CPUs, you have to install thermal paste or apply thermal paste, but it's nothing terribly difficult. It's something I've been doing for years, building computers and servicing computers, and I'm going to show you exactly what you need to do in order to accomplish this task. So, without further ado, I'm going to move the camera, show you how to pull off the side panel, show you how to pull out the CPU tray, and we'll get started replacing the actual CPUs. Alrighty, so the first step in replacing the CPUs is removing the side panel and removing the CPU tray. So, I have a cloth ready to go underneath the CPU tray. I'm going to go ahead and pull off the side panel. To do that, all you need to do is reach for this latch right here on the back of the computer, pull it up, and pull the side panel out towards you at the top. Let it hinge out like this, and then lift it up off of the rest of the enclosure. Set it down somewhere carefully, and then you're ready to take out the CPU tray. In order to do that, like I showed in the RAM replacement video, all you have to do is push on the knurled portions of these 2 levers to get them to pop out. These are generally a little bit stiffer than the side panel latch, but they'll come out pretty easy. And all you need to do is at the same time pull these levers outwards and pull the CPU tray out towards you. And there you go. CPU tray is out of the computer. So I'm going to resituate the camera just so you can get a better angle, and I can show you exactly how to pull off these CPU heat sinks, and we'll go on from there. Alrighty, so I have the CPU tray set up here on the countertop, and I'm ready to start removing each one of these heat sinks. Now, these heat sinks are held onto the processors with 4 3mm Allen screws. You're going to need a fairly long Allen key in order to reach down all the way through the heatsink to the bottom where the head of the screw actually is. And the ones that I'm using are from Bondus. This is a set that I'll link below in the description. You can get off Amazon for quite inexpensive. Great thing to have on hand, not just for servicing computers, but for other purposes as well. So, one thing that I'm going to note before we pull these heatsinks off, it's always a good idea to count the number of turns that it takes to pull the heatsink off. The reason being is that some of these Mac Pros are known for being somewhat sensitive to how tight the heat sinks are whenever they're reinstalled, so how tight you tighten them down. And it's just a good idea, if for no other reason, to have that data on hand in case you have any doubts about how tight you've reinstalled these heat sinks once you're done. So what I'm going to do is go ahead, crack these guys loose. They're not very tight, and I'm going to take them loose off camera just so I can make note of the number of turns that it takes to pull them out quickly and efficiently. I believe on this model of Mac Pro, these are spring-loaded. I can't remember for sure. So once they're loosened all the way, they'll pop out along with the Allen key. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, let you know how it goes. And in theory, whenever I cut back, this heatsink should be off. Okay, so we are back. I have both new CPUs installed, ready to go. I have the heatsinks cleaned off. I gave the CPUs I wiped down with isopropyl alcohol along with the CPU heatsinks, which is isopropyl alcohol is what I use to clean them as well. I highly recommend that you very, very thoroughly clean your heatsinks as well as the CPUs. Even if they appear to be clean, just give them a cursory wipe down just to make sure. At this point, everything should be ready to reinstall. This heatsink, 1165-A, goes on this side of the logic board. 1164-A goes on this side. So if you get those mixed up, if you switch them around while you're cleaning them or whatever, just so you know, 64 over here, 65 over here. That's the last few digits of the part number. At this point, all we need to do is install thermal paste or apply thermal paste and then install the heat sinks on top of the CPUs. So when applying thermal paste, there's several ways to do it. What I typically do is either put a pea-sized amount in the middle of the CPU or run a very, very thin line across the CPU. You don't want to put an enormous amount on the heatsink, glob it on, anything like that. You don't want to put too little either because your CPU won't be effectively cooled. So I recommend that if you are still unsure after that description of how to apply heatsink compound, you go on YouTube, search up some videos of literally how to apply heatsink compound or thermal paste, and somebody out there should have a very, very detailed tutorial that will probably help you out. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and apply the heatsink paste, put the heatsink back on off camera just so I can make sure that everything is aligned properly and I have the best view of everything. And then I will go ahead and talk to you about how I recommend tightening these down. At this point I have the first heatsink installed and I just want to run through the torque sequence that I used. So whenever installing a heatsink like this that screws down into place, you want to always cross torque. What that means is you start at one screw, then move diagonally to the next one, then to the next one, and then diagonally to the last one. Now, the sequence that I use to torque these, which is not per any official Apple spec unless I happen to get lucky and get it right, is starting the screws with about 2 turns apiece. So 2 turns, 2 turns, 2 turns, 2 turns. And then following that up with 4, 4, 4, and 4. And then tightening until the screw stops. Because of the way these screws are designed, in that they're spring-loaded, whenever the screw is tightened down fully, it will stop. And with a T-handle Allen key, you can see that you have a little bit of ability to torque the driver while the screw is stationary. It's a really nice way to kind of know that you're at the correct tightness for the given screw size. So that's what you're going to want to do. Tighten it down until you're able to have the driver move with a little bit of give, but not the actual screw. So I have this heatsink completely torqued down and ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and apply thermal paste over here, install the second heatsink in the same exact way. And one thing to keep in mind when installing these is that there's a connector for the fans on either side. Just make sure that whenever you're dropping the heatsink back on, you have that lined up. There's no way that you can really install one of these wrong unless you do it really, really wrong, but just something to keep in mind. If you're wondering why the heatsink's not going on, first thing you should check. So, go ahead and get that done, and I'll show you how to put the CPU tray back in, and then we'll fire up the computer and see what happens. Well, we are finally ready to install the CPU tray back into the Mac Pro. I have both CPU heatsinks tightened down fully. Everything's reinstalled and ready to go. So, in order to throw the heatsink or the CPU tray back in, if you need more instructions than what I'm about to give you, go take a look at the RAM installation video at the very end. I show in a little bit more detail how to reinstall the CPU tray and how exactly it mates up with the connectors inside. Basically all you need to do is line up the tray with the little slots on each side of its receptacle, as well as with the standoffs. And once you got it set into place, slide it in until it stops, until these latches start to come in, and then flip the latches down, and boom, your CPU tray is reinstalled and ready to go. So what I'm going to do is go ahead, plug this bad boy back in after closing up the side panel, turn it on, and let's see what happens. As you can see, we finally have the processors installed, the computer booted up, everything is recognized properly to 3.33 gigahertz Intel Xeons. Full disclosure, the pair of processors that I got at first that I showed installing earlier, one of the two was bad. It is what it is. That's something that can happen, so keep that in mind if you're doing this upgrade yourself. I've been upgrading computers for years and building computers for years. This is the first time I've gotten a bad processor. It's been a used processor, so that's probably why it was bad, but it's the first time it's happened to me. Not saying it's a probability that it's going to happen, but it's a possibility. One thing you want to keep in mind, if you have issues with getting your computer to post, getting to boot up, you can, in these dual processor systems, install only one processor. Install it in the CPU A slot, which is the one on the right-hand side. If you're looking through the side panel of the computer, it's the heatsink on the right-hand side. So if you're having issues, what I did was installed one of them, had it boot up just fine as a single 6-core system, swapped over to the other processor, didn't boot at all. So I knew that was a bad processor. Tested it in another 1366 socket motherboard that I had sitting around, and issue was repeated. So knew it was a bad CPU. Overall, like I showed earlier in the video, not a terrible process, just have to keep in mind the instructions, follow them, to the letter, and you'll be fine. It's not a super difficult thing to do. You just have to go step by step and make sure you don't bend any CPU socket pins. That's the main risk factor within this upgrade. So with that, I want to thank you all for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.